Hi, this is Ashwin, and I'd like to take you through the Behavior Design Canvas itself in this video. Now, I've said in the past video that the reason for me to come up with this design pattern was to create an overarching framework that would help me get through the complexity of applying behavioral science in all kinds of projects. I work a lot in digital projects, but the canvas itself is agnostic to the kind of project you apply it to. It's also not designed only for application into for-profit or corporate or startup or even technology projects, but really can stretch across the board for impact projects, nonprofits, and it can be applied to even personal behavioral developmental change. So I said I was looking for a structured and almost linear framework. And that's why the canvas here has three stages. The first being target, the second is align, and the third is shape. And although this is a linear framework and there is a certain direction to how the framework flows, in actually using it, you could populate it in a non-linear fashion. It often happens in my projects and trainings that sometimes we know what the trigger is already, or we have an understanding of user motivation before we know what is exactly the desired behavior we want to define. And in other cases, it's much more obvious what the behaviors are that we're trying to shape before we can understand the other elements of the canvas. So much like other canvases, I'd encourage you to approach this canvas with a nonlinear mindset, but do understand that the flow of the logic and the relationship between the elements in the canvas are from left to right and through these three stages: target, align, and shape, which is essentially the pathway into behavior design. Now I'll go into the three stages step by step. The stage target has two parts. One of them is the definition of the present behavior or the current behavior. What does the human currently do? And the second part is the definition of the desired behavior. And as you can see, the difference between these two parts, or the bridge between these two parts, is really the behavioral change that we're looking at. Now, the study of behavioral change and behavioral change approaches and methodologies are quite numerous. There is a lot of good research out there, and I would encourage you to explore the literature to understand the relationship between how the human does something currently to how we might anticipate or expect or hope our target human being to do the defined target behavior. Targeting behavioral change is the fundamental approach to behavior design, no matter what theory or what model you look at. If you don't have a clear idea of the kind of outcome behaviors that you want to achieve through the behavioral intervention, you're probably not going to get very far. So the span of thinking and the amount of time you could put into targeting the behavioral change desired is can be quite a lot. And it's in this part, the first part, that we get inputs from the business goal. I would like to call this the business goal or the impact goal, because if you're a nonprofit, you measure your business effectiveness by impact, then your goals could be quite different than affecting just the bottom line. And we could also get inputs on the revenue model and the business model here, or the delivery model or the go-to-market model in this stage. And then this is also like these two first stages, really, target and align, are also the stages where the human and user insight, as well as customer research and understanding, become really important and applicable. Also, behavioral targeting can be an understanding of whether the behavior that you're targeting is an extension of existing behavior or a complete disruption of existing behavior. I've given a few clues to how this works in the video titled Why Design for Behavior Change, and I urge you to look that up, but there's just too little time here to go into this in too much detail. Great, so we figured out that we need to work on targeting the behavior in the first step. And then we move on to the second step of the canvas, where we are essentially looking at tapping into user motivation, the inherent motivation that's already in human beings to help them achieve the outcomes they would like to achieve. So aligning human um, expectations and outcomes and desires with the behavioral changes that we want to achieve is critical. And that's the second part, where essentially we're looking at two different strategies. If the motivation on the part of the human is aligned, and if it's a yes, then we have a certain direction to go down. But if it's not aligned, you should think of human motivation as the wind in your sails of behavior change. And if you don't have this wind blowing in your direction, it's working against you. And the set of strategies that we need to use to change, to effect behavioral change in such a scenario would be quite different. Once you figure that out, you know what motivational strategies to employ in your project and what motivational elements that exist in your target customer base or the target group that you want to make an impact into. You understand how to leverage the motivation that is inherently there. Again, I apply a bunch of different motivational models from psychology and behavioral economics and cognitive science and social psychology. I go into this part quite deeply in my workshops and trainings, as well as in my consulting work. But again, I encourage you to look at motivational literature and other models and theories which will help, as well as look at the user insight and customer understanding you already have to get past this point. This stage is also super important from an ethical perspective. And the goal of the second stage is also to have an integrated ethical dimension into the canvas itself. Now, keeping this ethical imperative in the forefront of the project and the behavioral change work is, I think, super important in my view. And that means harnessing positive human motivation and the impulse on the part of a human for a better state of mind and quality of life and experience. The third stage of the canvas is really the shaping of that behavioral change into something that's more repetitive and longer lasting. And essentially, this is a classic habit loop. There are a few different kinds of habit loops that we can learn from psychology and sociology, and these become the basis for the pattern here. Now, any lasting behavioral change could be called lasting only if there is some sort of repetition. And again, understanding the differences between habits and routines and understanding the role of novelty in habits, all of these play quite an important role in figuring out how to sustain those positive behaviors that we may want to create. So that's the canvas very quickly on a high level. Now, like I said, I take at least a few hours to go through this in depth, but I do hope this video gives you a fundamental understanding of how to use the canvas, and I really hope that you enjoy using the canvas on your projects. Thanks.